Hey guys, it's me again with my actual voice for the first time. I thought I could do this to share my thoughts in a far smoother way than talking in a robot voice, if you know what I mean. Today I wanted to talk about a specific position that has a ton of relevancy in the competitive scene in UF, but not so much in public games or the casual scene. And that position is offensive line, or center, or however you want to name it. The offensive line have always been a weird position over the years with a ton of issues surrounding it, especially in Ultimate Football. For one, it's always been one of those positions where it isn't often played in public games despite it being relevant in league games. Blocking is a very central part of the game. Not much can happen without blocking. It's practically the only thing stopping the game from being a lob group toss-up game every time where the quarterback just backs up 30 plus yards and throws it in the end zone. Wait, people still do that even with blocking? Oh. Well, either way, the position no doubt has a ton of impact, giving the quarterback more time to throw, which can lead to receivers having more time to get open. Not much can happen without offensive line. But why is it never used in public games? If it was so impactful and could set up huge plays, you'd think it would be just as good and more widely used in the casual scene as it is in the competitive scene, right? Well, not exactly. The reason why running back isn't used is because it lacks a real identity, which thus makes it useless. The main problem with offensive line, and what stops people from playing it, is it's just not a preferred playstyle to a lot of players, even if the position is overtuned. The first problem with offensive line is how boring and repetitive it is compared to the other positions in the game. There isn't much you can do gameplay-wise for the offensive line, except for spamming the block button in the defensive line's general vicinity for most of the game. Of course, it's fine for a position, class, or character to be easy to play, but there isn't a whole lot of skill expression for the offensive line to master, even with it being so easy to play. At least for other positions like quarterback and wide receiver, those positions are always played the same since they have a ton more player expression. But the offensive line just doesn't have a ton to work with. The second problem is sort of the same reason as tanks and supports in role or class-based games such as RPGs or Overwatch. Yes, these roles can be impactful, but they are pretty much the most team-reliant roles there are. Sure, a tank, for example, can take as much attention and damage as possible over a large period, but if the people on your team don't capitalize on what you are providing for them, it's basically worthless. The players need to back up the tank with damage since they won't be targeted as much, and the supports need to make sure everyone is staying healthy, including the tank. It's sort of the same with a support role as well, since their utility can also be useless if your team doesn't take advantage of it. While they can offer high-impact abilities, they aren't often the ones carrying the team due to how team-reliant they are, and thus can have the feeling of providing little agency in the actual game. The offensive line has the very same problem as this. Sure, you can play the position as perfectly as you can, but it won't stop the quarterback from throwing it in the middle of the defense, nor does it prevent wide receivers from dropping multiple passes. If you have never had that feeling, then you probably have never played offensive line before. What makes the offensive line worse than the examples I've stated previously is that tanks and supports in those kinds of games have at least some form of skill expression or player expression for that matter. Tanks like Reinhardt from Overwatch have abilities like his shield and his Earth Shatter, which can protect and single-handedly win a team fight respectively if used well. However, those abilities can also be easily countered if not timed properly or if the enemy team plays against it well. So there's a good difference between a good and bad Reinhardt depending on how they use their abilities. The offensive line, on the other hand, doesn't have that except for spamming the block button, and it isn't even that hard to do since latency can make outplaying the defensive line far easier than it actually is. I mean, heck, sometimes when I play defensive line, they can just block me from like 5 to 10 yards away because latency is a thing, and you can't do anything about it, even if you do outplay them and get over them. And before you ask, no, it isn't a skill issue on my end. I'm one of the top defensive line players in the league in LFG, and even was in AFL for a while when I played in Season 17. I think I earned the right to talk about how overtuned or undertuned blocking is, especially when I play offensive line on offense along with tight end. So I have played with offensive line and against it, and I know some will say that I don't have to be good at the game to understand how it works, but some people are still going to use that card because why not? But yeah, to sum it all up with what is wrong with offensive line, it's not really a bad position, or even close to that. On the contrary, I believe it's overtuned in my opinion, and likely other players share that as well. The main problem with it is that the position is too unappealing and boring for most players. They would rather make flashy plays in 1v whatever the game offers you. A lot of people want to be the hero of the story out of ego rather than be a part of the team as a whole. It's ironic in a team-based game, I know, but it's how things are in these kinds of things. If a UF dev or staff or whatever is watching this, players actually enjoy these kinds of team-based roles, or positions in this case, so please stop alienating them like they don't exist. Other people play offensive line and actually want to play it. Same with other positions that aren't quarterback and wide receiver. In terms of solutions of what I can do with the offensive line, I would say giving offensive line some form of skill expression that hopefully doesn't change the game too much. Unfortunately, that task is far easier said than done, but one recommendation I could make is that the offensive line should have this ability where if the player is, let's say, behind 3 or 4 yards behind line of scrimmage, they have access to an ability similar to Fiora's W from League of Legends. Okay, this is a whole other game, but hear me out. What Fiora's W does in that game is that it locks her in place for a little bit, but if the enemy uses an immobilizing effect on her during her ability, like a stun or freeze, knock up, whatever you want to call it, she ends up stunning the first player hit by it. Essentially, it is sort of like a parry to an extent. You could implement it in the same way in UF, where if the offensive line uses this ability, they are rendered stationary for a little bit, but if the defensive line chooses to block the offensive line during that ability, they're gonna get stunned. Or pancaked, or whatever you want to call it. If the defensive line doesn't block during this ability, the offensive line is just going to be stuck until the ability ends, which can give the defensive line the advantage it needs to get past them. It wouldn't really change much of the dynamic between offensive line and defensive line since it's usually just a mind game anyways, so it really isn't going to make that much of a difference. It can also give the offensive line an advantage to outplay the defensive line since defensive lines usually like to block to separate themselves from the offensive line, so it'll definitely make them think twice before they do it. However, it doesn't mean the offensive line will be off the hook since if the offensive line uses this ability wrong, or if the defensive line reads when the offensive line will use it, you are going to be a sitting duck for a while, unable to do anything. But that's just me. What do you guys think about offensive line? Is there something I missed as to why it isn't appealing to you guys, or is there another solution you guys want to provide to me? Let me know in the comments below. If you guys don't know, I'm planning on making a series out of this where I sort of want to talk everything about UF, if you get my drift. It will mostly be about positions everyone wants to play, nobody wants to play, or mechanics and game modes if you guys really want to see that. Until next time though, thank you all for watching and I will see you all next time. Wee.